Okay, I hope you had a good lunch. Shall we get started again? Okay. So, I started talking about greenhouse effect. All of you know this, right? Let's look at some of the greenhouse gases. And this data is a bit old. This data is from prehistoric times till 2010. And if you look at some of the major greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. You can see how carbon dioxide before 1750, before the Industrial Revolution started, was 280 parts per million, and it has increased so much since then. It's 395 parts per million up to 2010, and now it is much higher than that. It's about 460 parts per million. Likewise, methane, you can see the big difference in methane that has happened. Methane has increased, or has almost doubled, from 700 parts per billion to 1893 parts per billion. Nitrous oxide has also increased significantly. All these have increased quite a bit in the last, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And some of these gases have much higher global warming potential because some of them stay in the atmosphere for a very long time. So carbon dioxide, carbon dioxide is used as a standard for many of these calculations. So the impact of all other gases is measured relative to the impact of carbon dioxide, as you all know. Some of these, as you can see here, carbon dioxide is if it's unit 1. Then methane is about 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Okay, so 1 unit of carbon dioxide, 1 unit of methane has 84 times much more significant impact. We human beings produce a lot of methane. Do you know which is the largest source of methane? Human-caused source of methane. Yeah.
Paddy cultivation.
Paddy cultivation. Yeah. How paddy cultivation?
It's from wastage.
Yes. Landfills. Landfills are all waste dumps. They are the biggest source of anthropogenic, that is human-caused methane. So stuff from paddy might also get to the landfill, but landfills are the biggest cause of methane. And there are some other, in this central column, this column right in the center, you can see a few other ones. Like for example, nitrous oxide is 264 times. CFC 12 is 8,800 times. And this is refrigerant, used as a refrigerant, right? That's why manufacturers are changing refrigerant that is used in fridges. They're changing that because it has such a big impact. Then the largest number that you see is sulfur hexafluoride, and that also has such a big impact, the highest impact of all the gases that you see on this table. And sulfur hexafluoride is not used much, but is used in sports equipment. I don't know how many of does anyone here play tennis? Like anyone in the audience play tennis? Lawn tennis, yeah. Okay, so the lawn tennis ball is inflated with sulfur hexafluoride. So when a ball is destroyed, you release sulfur hexafluoride. So many common things that we use have these carbon components. And this is how anthropogenic, that is human caused. Anthropogenic means human caused. How these human caused GHG emissions, how they have changed. I think I have a slide for more recent information. So in 1990, in carbon dioxide equivalents, the biggest cause of greenhouse gas emissions was industrial processes. So almost a third of all the greenhouse gases came from industrial processes. And the second was agriculture. So agriculture also contributes a lot of to greenhouse gas emissions. Power generation is 20%, and now in 2017, it changed a little bit over 25 years. Industry was also a very large segment, 21%, but agriculture became the largest, 24%. And electricity and heat production also became very large. So industry became cleaner because there was lots of concern about pollution from industries, and government started regulating, industry started self-regulating, and because of that, the proportion of greenhouse gas emissions caused by industry dropped. But some of the other fields, like agriculture, is not so well regulated in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Electricity production between 1990 and 2017, the big reason why greenhouse gas emissions from electricity increased so much is, what is the big reason? And can anyone guess? The big reason why the share of greenhouse gas emissions from electricity increased from 20% in 1990 to 25% in 2017. Can anyone guess the major reason?
Thermal heat generation.
From which country?
China.
Primarily China. In China, they're building about 10 to 12 new coal power plants every year to meet the energy demand. So, a big reason why greenhouse gas emissions from electricity production increased is because of coal production, increasing coal production. India is also doing that. Okay, China and India are both building lots of coal. Both have committed to clean energy and all that, but at a future date. Right now, they're building. Both of them are building lots of coal plants. And now let's look at the top emitter countries. In terms of all the carbon dioxide emitted over the last 200 years, the biggest contributor is actually North America. Okay, a lot of over the last 200 years, all the carbon dioxide equivalent that has been generated has all the pollutants that have been released primarily have come from North America, primarily from US. And Europe also, but less than North America. And then China and Eastern Europe have contributed much lesser. Now let's look at currently on a year-to-year basis and a per capita basis. I was trying to get more, I'm going to show you two graphs right now. I was trying to download more recent information this morning, but I had some internet issues, so I couldn't. So the data is a bit dated, but this is from 2012. And the top emitting country today is China. Okay, in terms of total amount of emissions that are being generated, it's put out into the atmosphere, is China. And the US is also a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. On a per capita basis though, on the right side, the graph on the right side, there you see a different story, right? China is not the worst offender on a per capita basis. If you look on the left graph, India is number 4, right, in terms of total number of greenhouse gas emissions. But if you look at the right graph, India is not one of the top 4. Okay, because on a per capita basis, it's polluting much lesser. Even though as a country as a whole, that's because of population, right? As a country as a whole, it's pretty big, but on a per capita basis. And per capita basis is a better metric to use. And so you see there countries like Australia and Kuwait. Kuwait has a very large carbon footprint. It is producing so much per capita. And then Australia is producing so much per capita. And then, you know, on both on the left and the right, you see many countries, the share is so small. Compared to China, on the left graph, compared to China, US, EU, India, and Russian Federation, Indonesia, and Brazil, most of the countries have very small total greenhouse gas emissions. So if you can change the greenhouse gas emission profile of these 4 or 5 countries, you'll have a big impact on controlling green. You don't have to solve the entire world's problems. Just solving the problem in 4 or 5 countries can have a huge impact. And one of the biggest, you know, US is one, but India is the other one. If changing the greenhouse gas emission profile of these 2 countries, India, China, and US, it will make a huge impact on climate change. So now I want to move to this other topic. Remember I said I will cover 3 topics, and I want to move to this second topic, which is increasing urbanization. Now before I do that, I've shared some information with you on climate change. Does anyone want to comment on what we saw, or do you have any reactions, or do you want to add something to what we discussed? Please feel free to. And does anyone? We covered a few slides. I covered a few slides before lunch, and now there are a couple more slides on that first topic. Does anyone have any comments? Any reactions?
Yes, so as you were telling us about the Anthropogenic period.
Yeah.
So this phase, I guess it's called period of Anthropocene.
Anthropocene, yeah.
And the period before the Industrial Revolution was Pliocene.
Yeah.
So, sir, what are the major differences between the Pliocene and Anthropocene? If we categorically divide both the periods, and what would be the period after the Anthropocene period? So how will it?
I don't know what's going to come after the Anthropocene period, because now prior to the Anthropocene period, what the big difference was, human beings generally lived in harmony with nature.
Right, sir.
And so with the dawn of the Anthropocene age, primarily catalyzed by the Industrial Revolution, we are harnessing lots of means of production that are using lots of resources, and we are consuming lots of resources, and also putting out lots of harmful products into the atmosphere and to water bodies. So that's the one big difference. And can we go back to the Pliocene age? Probably not, because we have gotten used to different kinds of lifestyle.
Yes.
And some people say, actually when you read the reading by Scott Campbell, that is prescribed for tomorrow, he discusses this difference. Pliocene versus Anthropocene. He doesn't use those that same language. And one of the important things that he mentions is that a lot of environmentalists say we should go back to the Pliocene area because then we were polluting less.
Yes.
And he says, but the quality of life that time was also quite challenging, because lots of people, we didn't have general economic prosperity. Life expectancy was very, very small, very low. It was 35 or 40 years was the life expectancy of people. Lots of diseases were there, and we didn't have the technology or the knowledge to deal with them. And so although we transitioned from Pliocene to Anthropocene, our quality of life has generally become better, but we need to be more responsible. And we'll get into that, responsible towards whom. We'll get into that in the third, what is sustainable development. We'll get into that, okay? But that's a very good question.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else, any comments or reactions? Okay. Increasing urbanization. So as this graph shows, the urban population is increasing significantly. Now, people like most of you living in India, living in China, Indonesia, Nigeria, this is something that you experience every day. You know how some cities are expanding. Okay, but most people in Europe and US don't know that this is happening. Okay, they don't know that this major demographic shift is happening from rural to urban in the world. And for most people in the US, they assume that everyone is either living in an urban area or living in a rural area. They don't know that this big shift is happening in the world. In the US, for instance, US has reached sustainable urban areas, or saturated urbanization. There about 80 to 85% of the population lives in urban areas. And economists say, demographers say that this change is good. It's not going to increase, because it won't ever become 100%, because some percentage of the population is needed to be working in sectors of the economy that are not urban. For example, agriculture, livestock, fishing, some mining, they're needed. And then some percentage of the population will always make a lifestyle choice on living in rural areas. So most people believe that in the US, for instance, this urban level, the urbanization level that we have of actually 83%, that urbanization level is not going to increase much. Okay. Whereas in places like India, urbanization is 33% in 2020, and it's increasing, right? There's a lot of potential to grow. So this demographic shift from rural to urban is a major phenomenon in developing countries. And it has, as someone mentioned earlier this morning, there are lots of problems that come with increasing urbanization, because often there are the amenities and facilities that are needed for a good urban life are not available in developing countries as they are urbanizing. Okay, so some people say if there's more investment put into urban infrastructure, we can make urban areas in India, Indonesia much better. Okay, and I actually disagree with that. I'll tell you why. So let's take the US population, okay, as an example. And in the US population is about 330 million. And about 80% today is urban. In 1800, 20% of the US population was urban. Okay, to get to 80%, the US population transitioned from 20% to 80% over 200 years. Okay, and so when that transition, it multiplied by 4 times over 200 years. There is a lot of time to build institutional capacity and to build out infrastructure when that is the pace of urbanization. Okay, now in India, for example, as these numbers I was just calculating at the moment in the morning. 33% of India's population is urban today. So 1.3, 33%, 1/3, let's say 400 million people are living in urban areas today. And in 25 years, it's going to be 50% of 1.8 billion or so. Let's say 1.5 billion, so 750. So 400 to 750, 350 million people are going to live in urban areas. Will be living in urban areas in 25 years. What's the population of the US? The entire population of the US is 350 million people. All these people are living in urban areas in the US, were accommodated and provided the infrastructure over 200 years. India has this challenge of providing this urban infrastructure for the new urban, not the old urban. The new urban that's going to happen in the next 25 years. They have the challenge, India has the challenge of trying to provide infrastructure for this new urban of 350 million people in 25 years. Even if you have all the money, as much money as you want, it's very difficult to make that infrastructure happen in 25 years. Okay, so there has to be a paradigm shift. It has to be different. And so India cannot, developing countries cannot aspire, should not aspire to have a Western model of urbanization. The Western model of urbanization is not sustainable, and I'll get into why later on during the course. It's not sustainable, and especially impossible to achieve in rapid urbanizing contexts like India and Indonesia and many other developing world. Okay, so India has to come up with a new model, of new paradigm of urbanizing, and it's possible. A sustainable paradigm of urbanizing is possible. Such experiments have been done of doing more sustainable stuff, has been done in other countries. It's been done in Sweden, it's been done in Germany, it's been done in some portions of the United States as well. However, the problem with all these developed countries, even if they become more sustainable, even if they urbanize more sustainable in the next 25 years, in terms of scale, very little urbanization is happening in those countries. So even if they all, sorry? So even if all the countries are extremely, if US and Scandinavia, all of them do sustainably, their impact on reducing global greenhouse emissions is very, very small. Okay, so the opportunity that developing countries such as India have, and urbanizing countries such as India has, is very, very huge. The potential is very huge. Okay, and so that opportunity is there. And most of the urbanization in the world is happening in developing countries the next few years. In fact, the human race, for the first time, became an urban race only in 2015 or so, when 50% or more than 50% of the human population has never before lived in urban areas in history. First time they started living in urban areas is in 2015. So right now, across the globe, 55% of the population lives in urban areas. 2015 is it's only in 2015 that we crossed 50%, and we crossed 50% in 2015 because of urbanization in two big countries, China and India. Okay, so till 2015, the human race, humankind, has always been non-urban. They lived in urban areas, but majority lived in rural areas. So since 2015, human race has entered a different era, just like the shift between Pliocene and Anthropocene. Similarly, from a rural race, it has become a predominantly urban race. And most of it is going to happen, as this graph on the right shows, most of this is going to happen in the developing countries of the world. So why is this relevant to climate change? Why is urbanization relevant to climate change? And I have lots of points, but I want to ask you, why is urbanization relevant to climate change? So whoever wants to, why is, what are the connections between urbanization and climate change? Why is the amount of urbanization in developing countries so important? Yes, sir, from Calcutta. Yeah.
Urbanization is getting more, so the resource use is getting high.
Yeah.
Okay, so for that, like, pollution is also increasing, and that leads to climate change. And there are other factors also. I'm just pointing out one of the factors.
Right. So why would more pollution come from urban areas?
Like, since people are using, since more people are using the resources,
Yeah.
so that's why the pollution gets increased.
Okay, suppose there were 100 people,
Yeah.
and 50 lived in urban areas, 50 lived in rural areas, but they are both. If the 50 living in rural areas, if they move to urban areas, will they add to the pollution?
Yeah, I think so.
Why?
Because when people living in the rural areas, they move to urban areas, they tend to change their lifestyle.
Okay.
Like they will prefer more cars. They will maybe they will buy a new car.
Right.
So that will add to the current pollution level, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason.
Right. So lifestyle changes would happen along with urbanization, right?
Yes, sir.
And that could have a big impact on climate change. Good.
Yes.
Now, thank you very much. There are other people who have raised their hands. Who are the others? Yeah. Can you bring the mic up front? Can you just pass it up front?
We saw in the data that the major contributor of GHG was the electricity consumption.
Yeah.
So per capita consumption of electricity is very high in the urban areas if you compare it to the rural areas.
Right.
So if there is more concentration of population in urban areas, more per capita consumption of electricity will happen.
Right.
So that is one of the causes. Then we have vehicular emission,
Yeah.
and industrialization is also linked to the cities.
Right.
So all these three factors are there in the urban areas.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Use of building materials such as concrete in a huge scale, which causes urban retardation.
Yes, concrete is cement primarily is one of the biggest reasons for, it has a huge impact on carbon dioxide levels, right? It has a huge impact. The use of cement increases as does urbanization. And that really contributes to climate change very, very significantly. So cities actually cover less than 2% of the Earth's surface, but they consume 75% of global energy, carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. So cities are producing most of the pollutants also, right? They are consuming so much of energy, and the production of energy creates lots of pollution. These energy sources might be outside the city, but they're consuming so much of energy. And then they produce so much of carbon dioxide, partly through industrial processes, but partly also by the business of living in a city, right? You're driving from one place to the other. You're driving from home to office, home to school, home to shopping, or back. So the lifestyle within a city and the type of transportation patterns that are required for that lifestyle have a huge impact on cities. By 2050, over 75% of the global population is expected to be living in cities. Now, this migration to the cities, while generally negative for the environment, believed to be negative for the environment, okay, is not something that has that we should be ashamed about or try to restrict. So we should not try to reduce urbanization. Why is that? That is because urban areas are drivers of the global economy. In most India is primarily an agricultural country. Like majority of the population increase is engaged in agricultural occupations. But the contribution of agriculture to India's GDP is not very large. Okay, it's not very large. So although lots of people are employed in agriculture, its role in India's GDP is not very large. And when did India start becoming more prosperous? As the Indian GDP or the share of Indian GDP started moving away from agriculture. As India started industrializing more, people's income started increasing more. And where does industrialization generally happen? Industrialization generally happens in cities. Okay, why does it happen in cities? It happens in cities because cities there is access to different kinds of goods, raw materials that are generally brought to cities. Cities have also one important ingredient that is required for industrialization, and that is diverse and deep human capital. You have people with diverse amounts of skills, and you have people with lots of different kinds of skills that you find in cities you will not find in urban areas. So most of the innovations that happen, innovations that we use, for example, like iPhone, like Apple iPhone, that doesn't happen in a rural area because it requires people with different kind of skills to come together and work in one place. And these people come together, accidentally or are brought together in cities. So cities are drivers of the global economy. And as India urbanizes more, India's income will increase more. Okay, and that has been the historical experience of almost every country in the world. As it urbanizes more, income increases more, because urbanization is linked to the structural shift in the economy. And this structural shift in the economy, the big structural shift in the economy is from agriculture to non-agriculture, from basic industry to non-basic industry, from extractive to manufacturing and service industry. So the shift from rural to urban is a good thing. It brings prosperity. It lifts lots of people out of poverty. It produces lots of goods that people like. It produces lots of amenities that people like. For example, in most countries, I think even in India, urban areas have better schools than rural areas. Urban areas have better medical facilities than rural areas. Urban areas have better shopping facilities than rural areas. So urbanization is generally something that improves quality of life. But it has these negative impacts on the environment, it has these negative impacts on the earth and water and all that. And we need to pay attention to it, and there are ways to solve it. So you can have all the benefits of urban areas while minimizing their negative, the negative aspects of urban areas. And then you can also think of, so not just reducing the harm caused by urban areas, but also designing urban areas in such a way that they produce less greenhouse gas emissions. For example, if 100 people were living in rural areas and each of them had 4 or 5 cars, let's say they are very rich, and had 4 or 5 cars and consuming lots of goods and services, they will produce, let's say, 100 tons of carbon dioxide. But if you move those 100 people to an urban area, now they're living close to each other. They're living close to lots of amenities and facilities. They probably will not need 5 cars. They probably will drive less. So urban areas have also this potential of reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So even accounting for people's lifestyles. So if people had, if they had the same kind of lifestyle in a rural and urban area, in an urban area it's possible that their greenhouse gas impacts would be much lesser. Okay, so that's why urban areas also have this potential of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Many urban areas are already feeling the effects of climate change. So in many urban areas you have the urban heat island effect, right? Because of climate change and the kind of transportation pattern. Many people are suffering from heat in many urban areas. And so places that are hot will become hotter, right? As climate change, as the world is becoming hotter. So there is a need to solve those problems rather than just sit idle. There is a need to solve those problems because these problems are felt more in urban areas. And second, urban areas also have large sections of very vulnerable populations. They've come there for economic reasons, they've come there maybe for social reasons. And so we as human beings have a moral responsibility to do something about climate change in urban areas, because there are large groups of people who are suffering from climate change in urban areas. So I'm sure in Patna there are lots of people who are living in, let's say, slums or who are homeless, and they feel all this heat. I mean, today we are in this, the temperature outside is maybe 36, 37 degrees centigrade, but we don't feel it so much because of this air conditioning. And yet there are so many poor people who are working, living, sleeping outside, who don't have that. And as human beings, we have some responsibility towards them, especially people who have some education and means like you and I. We have some responsibility towards those people who don't have the education and power and means to do something about it. And the solution to these urban problems will really come from urban areas. Urban areas bring together concentrations of really interesting people with wide variety of skills, with wide variety of talents, who think in very different ways. And you can bring them together in urban areas and you have lots of innovation happening. So most of this, the startups that are happening anywhere in the world, in India or in the US and anywhere in the world, they're generally located in urban areas, right? So India, there is a big startup culture coming up, right? And there are many people are starting startups. Most of them are doing it in urban areas because it brings together people of diverse backgrounds to facilitate this innovation. Also, urban areas have something that many rural areas don't have, that is access to capital. There are many financial institutions, there are many rich people who would invest. There are many financial institutions in urban areas that would give money for innovative stuff. Urban, in the next 20-25 years, lots of urbanization is going to happen. It's going to happen in developing countries. And this time that we have is a fantastic opportunity. The next 20 or 25 years is a fantastic opportunity to design sustainable urban areas. Okay, unfortunately, many countries, especially, many countries are saying, well, we will first build our cities the way we have always built, or where the West has built, and then after that, after we have come to a certain level of prosperity, certain level of industrialization, we will then change over and then make our cities more sustainable. Okay, that doesn't happen, because once you build a city with the old model, okay, you can't just suddenly change all the roads, remove all the roads. You can't suddenly change all the infrastructure that has been built out. So even though it is politically very challenging and might seem very daunting to build a more sustainable urban development pattern today, this is the time to do it. Okay, now take countries like, for example, the US or UK. They built their urban areas in the 1950s, 60s and 70s when they did not know then what they were doing was wrong. Okay, now they're trying to change. But the infrastructure that has been built for this bad kind of urban development is not easy to change. Roads have been, a lot of cities have been built at very low densities, where people are living far away from each other. People have to drive great distances. Okay, at that time they didn't know that this was bad, but now we know that this is bad, right? And so now that we know that this is bad, in developed countries, they are trying to change it. US is trying to make its urban areas much more climate responsive, have less carbon emissions, have less greenhouse gas emissions. But the hard infrastructure that is there is preventing it from making these huge changes. Okay, so the changes are happening right at the margin, very little change, because very little urbanization is happening in the developed countries. So even if you have lots of money, what the US, Australia, UK show is, even if you have lots of money, once you have a bad pattern of urbanization that has been set up, it's very difficult to change. Okay. Whereas like countries like India, Nigeria, Indonesia, they're all urbanizing right now. And rather than urbanizing badly like the US and UK and saying that we will fix it after 20-25 years, well, the experience of US and UK, Australia says that's not possible. Okay, and India, Nigeria, Indonesia, all these countries now have an opportunity to do urbanization right and show the rest of the world how they should have done urbanization. Okay, so they have this unique opportunity, and that opportunity must be seized. If it's not seized, it's a loss. It's a loss for each of these countries. So this is not just the Indian problem, not just the Indonesian problem. All developing countries are going through this. Africa is urbanizing like at a very rapid rate, much faster than India. But the population there is lesser, but the rate of urbanization, it's going from 5% urban to 30% urban in a decade, some countries in Africa. Okay, big six times the urban population is multiplying in 10 years. So they're also experiencing this problem. And so it's a moral choice. It's a philosophical and moral choice that countries have to make. Yes, it is difficult to grow responsibly right now, but the opportunity to grow responsibly is only right now. It's not later on. And urban areas are already at the, many urban areas are leading charges on some things. Like, for example, climate change mitigation, adaptation efforts. Urban areas are leading the charge on those things. One of the cities that I will mention, there are many examples like this, okay? All over the world there are many good examples of how cities are fighting against this. But one of the cities I admire a lot and will mention during the course of the workshop several times is the city of Hong Kong. And some of you have been to Hong Kong, but it's an example that probably India can learn from, because Hong Kong is an Asian city. And in 1970, today it's recognized as a very modern city, very high-tech, lots of financial institutions and all that. But 1970, it was like a collection of fishing villages. It was not very advanced. In 1970, the people of Hong Kong decided that its population was about 2 million, 2.2 million in 1970. And the people of Hong Kong said, we like our city as it is, but we know that population is going to increase. We know that the city is going to be industrializing, and we have a choice to make right now. They said in 1970, 50 years ago. And they said, we want to have a sustainable development pattern where we want to maintain as much of our land in the city in its natural state, leaving as much of the land in our city in its natural state. So they made a decision then that no matter how much the population increases, 70% of the land within the city will be untouched. So the total area of the land, how many square kilometers, how many thousand square kilometers it was, they said, well, this is the total amount of land, 70% will not be touched. Okay? Today, Hong Kong's population is about 7.5 million. So it's increased so much. Okay? And the amount of land that is devoted to urban uses, that is the amount of land that is being taken away from nature, is very close to 30%, is actually 31%. So even though the population has increased 3 times, they have been able to maintain their original vision of not using more than 30%, approximately 30% of the land. They said 30, they're at 31, and they probably won't increase more than 31, okay? They've been at 31 for a very long time. And even as the city grows, they're finding ways of accommodating people within the 30-31%. The advantage of that is there's so much of green space in Hong Kong. It's often compared to Singapore, but the comparison is not really the same, because Hong Kong had many more challenges than Singapore to do this. They have lots of green space. They have very clean air within the city. And in many places in Hong Kong, wherever you live, 10 minutes away, like if you're living in an apartment complex or a colony, 10 minutes away from where you live, you can be in an area which has never been touched by human hands. Like you'll find trees with monkeys and owls 10 minutes from where you live. So you just walk down and then go there and you'll find this. Like original nature is still there. One key thing that it did to do that, they made this decision, 31%, but one key decision that they made was on their transportation infrastructure. Okay? They decided in 1970, they decided that we will not have a car-dependent society. Okay? And they said, so what will we have? So they said that we'll have a metro or light rail based society. And so they identified in their land, in their city, they identified which parts of the city are ecologically less sensitive. So all the ecologically sensitive areas, they said no development at all. The less sensitive areas they identified for development. And there they first built a metro stop. And they connected that metro stop to, and then they laid metro lines. And then from that, let's say, center of the city to this metro stop in the outlying area, they built 4 or 5 stops. And they made the metro line. At each of these stops, they encouraged commercial residential development. And then 5-6 years after this development started, all these developments happened, they then built a road. So about 80 to 90% of all the daily trips made in Hong Kong, okay, 80 to 90% of the daily trips made in Hong Kong are made by metro. Most people, the metro is very cheap, very affordable, and most people will take the metro to work and back. Very good, very efficient. And at the same time, they made car ownership very, very difficult. Okay? They first built the metro infrastructure and made car ownership very difficult. So many of you are architects, right? So when you build a building, let's say in Patna, if you're building a commercial complex, I think building guidelines would say you have to have 1 parking space for 1,000 square feet of commercial space or something like that, right? There are guidelines like that, right? And if you don't build 1 parking space for 1,000 square feet, your building will not get approved. Is that right? There, they have no parking requirements. And so when a builder is building a building and he's putting parking, he or she is actually giving up sellable commercial space to put parking. So when they put parking, they do not provide free parking. So if you can look up Hong Kong, the newspaper is called the South China Morning Post. You will see advertisements in the South China Morning Post saying, parking spot available in this building, $100,000 US. You can buy it for $100,000 US. Okay? So parking spots are sold, and generally they are more expensive than the cars that will be parked. Okay? So that's one. And also, cars are not made in Hong Kong. They come from different countries. When the cars come in, if the car, this is 3 or 4 years ago, if the price of the car was under $40,000 US, the manufacturer's retail price was under $40,000 US, then there was a 60% tax, import duty on a car, regardless of where it came from, based on MSRP. If it was above $40,000 US, then the tax was 100%. So suddenly a car that is $41,000 US becomes $82,000 US if it's brought in. And that also reduces car ownership. Okay. Now Singapore also has ways of reducing car ownership, but the metro system that has been built out in Hong Kong, it's really, really very, very good. And they made that choice not based on whether this is, they made that choice in 1970. It's not a choice that they didn't first build out all the roads and then they said, once we have all the roads, then we'll put the metro. It doesn't work. Okay? Right now there is lots of momentum in many, many developing countries to build lots of roads, even in India. Right? There are many important people who are saying we have to build 1,000 kilometers of roads every day, every month or something like that. And then after that, we will then put a metro. No. You got to put a metro, you have to build this light rail infrastructure or public transit infrastructure first. Unless you do that, unless developing countries do that, including India does that, it's very, very difficult to come back and put it later on. So countries like Australia, US, England, they have the money to put the light rail. But because the infrastructure is all based on road, even if you put the metro system in there, no one uses it. Okay? So it's important to put the light rail first and then get people to start using the light rail, and then put the roads later on.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
In India, we are doing all the things at the same time.
Please use the phone. Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, indeed, what you have said is very nice. But what I want to say that in India, we are doing all the things at the same time.
Okay.
On one hand, government is building roads.
Yeah.
They are expanding the 2-lane road is converted into 4-lane.
4-lane road.
Then 4-lane into expressways.
Yeah.
And then we are having a lot of expressways coming up in
Yeah.
the last 10 years.
Yeah.
At the same time, the car ownership in India is considered as a symbol of prosperity.
Right.
So if you have a car, you are.
Prosperous.
And government cannot restrict like you cannot buy a car.
Mhm.
So all the things are happening at the same time.
Right.
We are also having car ownership. We are also having metro. We are also having highways, roadways. So just like you have said that in Hong Kong, it's only the metro is
Yeah.
most preferred
Yeah.
mode of transportation.
Yeah.
Other things comes. Car ownership is like people discourage. But in India, you will find a car, let's say 5 lakh rupees car.
Yeah.
So it's almost like dollars. It translates into.
Yeah, it's very affordable.
Yeah, it's very affordable.
Yeah.
So what I meant to say that everything is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Somehow we are not focusing on the right thing.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of people are, government of India cannot restrict people from buying a car, and they should not restrict people from buying a car. They should not restrict people from buying a car. However, when a person is using a car, right, when a person is using a car, the use of a car creates lots of negative externalities, what economists call negative externalities, right? So people are using a car, and so there is lots of pollution from the car that everyone else has to suffer from, right? And a lot of the extraction of minerals and all those things that happen in the production of the car, a lot of other people who don't use a car are suffering from that. So what in other countries, what people have done is they have put a huge tax on it to take care of the negative externalities. So even though the government perhaps cannot, in a democracy like India, tell people you cannot buy a car, governments can, cities can, states can say, well, supposing I'm living in India and I'm living in Patna and I'm using a car, the government of Patna, the city corporation of Patna or the state of Bihar could tell me, Jerry, yes, you can afford a car, you have a car, and if you want to use it, use it. But your use of a car is imposing a negative externality in all the people of the city or people of the state. And to make up for that, we have to charge you so much and take a tax based either on the purchase of the car or on the use of petrol. So either a one-time fee or a user fee, and use that, and so that will have two effects. One, it can be used to build other transit infrastructure. So now to build rail infrastructure, the city does not have any money, the state does not have any money, so it will provide a source of income for the state or the city to build that infrastructure. Second, as you raise the price, it will, for example, if the price of petrol in India were to double, a lot of people who have cars will start thinking about other modes of transportation, right? So so the government, either the state government or the city government, can say, okay, the negative externality imposed by Jerry, your use of the car is so significant that we are going to charge 100% tax for every liter of petrol. So how much is a liter of petrol now?
105.
105. So if they were to say 95 rupees tax on every liter, okay? So why is it not possible? Because of politics, right? Whichever government imposes it, that government will be voted out of power. So both parties, I mean, all parties have to agree to this, that the environment is worth saving. And our future, basically it's not just the environment, it is our future and the next generation's future, right, is worth saving. If they agree on that, then we could have a possible way to solve this problem. But it's doable, and many communities have done it. Many communities have done it all over the world. They've done it in very small places, I was talking to some people, and I'll ask you this question, okay, about whether this can happen in small communities. Now, someone mentioned earlier that one of the largest sources of anthropogenic methane is landfills. Okay. There are many communities in India who have actually gotten rid of landfills, and they're managing their waste very, very well. Okay, and big communities and small communities. So one big city that has done very well, I think almost everyone knows this place, is Indore. Okay, it's famous for doing that, and it's very, very good. People's culture there has changed. I was telling some people yesterday and this morning, I went to Indore 2 years ago, and I landed at the airport. I was taking an Uber, and it was late in the evening, and I was drinking water from a bottle, from a plastic bottle. So the Uber driver turns back to me and he says, after you finish drinking, you give me the bottle. Why? Because he's saying, you are not from this town. You won't know where to throw this bottle, and I don't want you to mess up my city. I will take your bottle and I want to keep my city clean. No one is monitoring him, but that culture change has come. And it's come within a very short period of time. 2016 to 2018, the change happened. When I went there in 2023, everyone was concerned about this, but the initial change happened within a very short period of time, 2016 to 2018. And then there's another city where the story is even more remarkable, because Indore had consultants. They bought in KPMG, a leading consulting company, to manage this change. Indore, 2 years ago, India hosted the G20. Many world leaders came. There's only one place that every world leader went to. Okay? I'm forgetting the name of the place, but Indore had a landfill where all the trash was put. Okay? All the trash. And in 2018, once this new management system was put in place, they didn't need a landfill anymore. And that landfill was converted, so this is 76 acres, landfill was converted into a city park. And there were they started this process in 2018. So by 2023, there were big trees, lots of butterflies and birds in that place. And during the G20 summit, every world leader that came to India, that former landfill that now became a park is the only place every world leader went to. Okay, so there are these important things that are happening, and if you look at many other cities in India, you would say, well, in India we can never eliminate landfills. In India we can never make the streets clean. But it's happened in Indore, and it's a model for the world. So these things that we kind of assume today, that we can't get people out of their cars, we can. We have to try, and we should. We can and we should.
Was it Nehru Park campus in Indore?
No, it is the name of the landfill. I don't know what it's called, the new name. It used to be called the Dev Goradia.
Dev Goradia.
Yeah. Are you from Indore?
No, so I'm working on waste management.
You're working.
So Dev Goradia is a biogas plant they have set
But,
up.
and they have the land, the new park as well, by the biogas plant.
2018.
Sorry?
In 2018 it happened.
Yeah, 2018. That's when this big change happened. But, so you're working in waste management. Have you heard the name Ambikapur?
Yes.
Okay. Ambikapur is a small city of 200,000 population. Okay, it's a district headquarters of a small district called Sarguja in the state of Chhattisgarh, which over a period of 2 years also decided that they'll have their clean streets, no landfill. And they've also done that. So you have city of Indore, 2.6 million population, the small town of Ambikapur, 200,000 population.
And also Sir Udupi in Kerala.
Karnataka.
Karnataka.
Yeah. And so, the reason I mentioned Ambikapur is like the place of Udupi is a generally prosperous place, high level of education. Whereas Ambikapur is not a prosperous place. It is not developing industrially. Okay, it has got a educational institution, it has got a hospital, and so therefore those are the drivers of the economy. It does not have many industries there. And even without this financial capital, it was able to make this change. So these changes are happening. We just need to have the desire to make the change and then show some mechanisms by which this change can happen, and the change can happen. Okay? So it's about 2:30 now. Let's take a break and then we'll go into sustainable development after this. Okay guys, let's restart, and we might finish a bit early because this is the first day, right? So we want you to be able to get used to the city and town, so we'll let you off a bit early. Tomorrow onwards we'll have a, we'll start at 10:30 and we'll have full sessions, 3 full sessions and an activity session. Partly because I was discussing with Shailendra that you haven't done, you didn't have an opportunity to do the reading. So I want you to give some time to do the additional reading also. Today is one and tomorrow is one, okay? So we'll leave after this at 3:30 or 3:45, we'll stop. And then tomorrow we'll have the full session. Unless you guys object and say, let's do for 1 more hour. Any objections to stopping early? No, okay. Okay. So, sustainability. So, what is sustainable development? So, so when someone says sustainable development, what does that phrase mean for you? Okay. So let me ask people, like, what does the phrase sustainable development mean for
It's
you?
like green computing, reducing the carbon footprints.
Yeah.
So like as a layman, I can tell if I'm a computer science faculty,
Yeah.
then we need to focus more on sustainable computing, green cloud computing.
Green cloud
where
computing.
we will be having less energy uses.
Yeah.
And the systems which are not being used,
Yeah.
we can make them in a shutdown mode,
Yeah.
so that we can save energy.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you started with computers and how they can be sustainable. Because I don't know if you, this AI.
Exactly, that's what, like, I'm here, I've done so many projects by making use of AI,
Yeah.
ML and DL algorithms.
Yeah.
So these algorithms can be used to reduce the carbon footprints and to reduce the energy, we will be having some kind of monitoring mechanism.
Yeah.
Through which we will be keep on monitoring the system, and we will find out that if it's not working quite from a long time,
Yeah.
and then we can make it shut down automatically.
Yeah.
And that's what which is happening in every data center which is situated at US and other countries.
Yeah. So I was going to say about the data centers. So about 4 months ago, I was at a data center very close to my city where I live. It was a Microsoft data center.
Yeah.
The data center, they're setting up more data centers because AI is expanding, right? So they're setting up more
Exactly.
data.
And they will place it nearby some water bodies, so that from hydroelectricity they can generate. And
Yes.
they
So
can
these
provide.
data centers need so much of water,
Yeah.
high intensity water, and so much of power also. So they can only be located in some places where the power is cheap, where water is plentiful. So they consume a lot of resources.
Exactly.
But I'm glad you started with that. That's an interesting. Anyone else? What does the phrase sustainable development mean?
The righteous use of resources is sustainable.
Wise use of resources. Okay, yeah, that is sustainability. So that's an environmental thing, right? Wise use of resources. Yeah, that is good. You want to say something more about? Okay. Anyone else? What is sustainable development? Looks like someone at the back there wants to say about sustainable development. There's lots of discussion about what is sustainable development. You want to share what is sustainable development? Someone at the back, the group of 4 there. No?
Preserve current resources.
Preserve current resources. Okay.
It's about development considering the future also.
Yes, that is good. So you
have a
are very.
definition of our common future.
Yes.
Given there that you consume the resources in such a manner that you are able to fulfill your requirements, and the future generation will be able to fulfill their requirements in the same manner as you are doing yours.
Exactly. And where that comes from?
Our common future report.
Yeah. Which year was that?
86.
Is it 86 or 90?
72.
72? Okay. I'm not sure of the year, but that's where it comes from. Yeah, so it's great. And so sustainable development is that development which enables us to have a certain quality of lifestyle right now, and without compromising the ability of future generations to have a similar quality of life, right? That is a definition of sustainable development. But what is common to all these definitions is a focus on environmental issues, right? And I'm going to challenge that assumption, and I'll show you a lot of people challenge that assumption, and I'll tell you why as we go along. So sustainable definitely is that, but sustainable development is more than that. So a more refined and let's say developed understanding of sustainable development is development that is sensitive to the environment. So in other words, using resources wisely so that future generations' ability to use a lifestyle is not compromised. So this is like 3 circles forming a Venn diagram, and the original notion of sustainable development was on the bottom right circle, only on the environment. Okay. Now the concept of sustainable development has really gone further than that, and it encompasses economic prosperity also, and social justice. Okay, and today people believe that any focus on sustainable development that does not take these 3 things into consideration will not truly be sustainable. Okay, and I'll give you an image to remember. Supposing you have a stool. You know what's a stool, right? Something to sit on or something to work on. And supposing that stool had 3 legs, okay, then it will stand firmly. But supposing it had only 2 legs, it's not going to stand firmly. If it had only 1 leg, it's not going to stand. So people today view sustainability as a 3-legged stool. And these are the 3 legs. And all legs have to be equally important. So if one of the legs is given more importance, the stool will still be unstable. So it's a 3-legged stool where all 3 legs have to be equally important. And I'll give you an example. Anyone from Africa here? Anyone has been to Mozambique? Mozambique?
No, Africa.
Yeah, we've been to Africa, okay.
I've been to Kigali.
Kigali, okay.
Kigali and then the Ethiopia capital.
Okay, Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa. So Mozambique is in South Central Africa. And it's, most of us don't know, we are insulated from this, but it's fighting the longest running civil war. It is there from the year 2000. They're fighting a civil war. Okay? And because of that, because civil war, lots of reasons for it, partly rooted in economic injustice, partly there is not enough, plus there's not much economic growth for a variety of reasons. So there is this civil war, injustice, and economic growth is stalling. Well, Mozambique prior to 2000 had the largest concentration of African elephants. And from 1950 to 2000, the World Wildlife Federation, UNESCO, many UN organizations had invested lots of money, and they had really brought back the African elephant population. And it was presented as a fantastic case of elephant conservation. Okay, now when you bring back one species, you have to bring back many species, plant and animal, to support that one species. So if you can bring back one species, you are actually having a general environmental success story. So in the year 2000, Mozambique was a great environmental success story. And if sustainable development was only about environmental preservation, Mozambique was the best example of that. But because there was not much economic opportunity and because there was injustice, this civil war started. And because of that, what's happening now is that all these groups that are fighting in the civil war, their primary source of food is the African elephant. They kill these elephants and they eat these elephants. So you can have a great environmental success story, but it's a one-legged stool. It will not sustain for some time, for a long time. Okay? And I'll give you another example. And this example is, this Mozambique example doesn't make headlines because, you know, people generally treat Africa like does not exist. Unless there's some big crisis or something, unless there's some ethnic cleansing like happened in Rwanda, people don't talk about. But these major things are happening, okay? So it's a big thing that all of us in the world should be concerned about, that the African population is going down, African elephant population is going down. But anyway, that just shows that even when you had a model environmental preservation program, it collapsed because the other two legs of the stool were not given importance, were not paid attention to. Yeah, someone at the back, you want to say something? No? Okay. I'll give you another example. And this example probably got some attention in India also. In the 1990s and 2000s, because of climate change, in the country of Somalia, which is an agricultural economy, rainfall patterns were disrupted. Rainfall became erratic, came at different times. Because of that, the agricultural economy was devastated, much more than any other country. So people, majority of the population, 60, 70, 80% of the population was engaged in agriculture. They had nothing to do. So what they did was, they're not very far from the Indian Ocean. They're not very far from the Red Sea, right? So what they decided was, groups of young people in their 20s would get into a small boat with a couple of guns and become pirates. So these environmental issues, have economic consequences, and they lead to this major political problems. And how was the problem solved? The problem was not solved politically. The problem was solved by reviving agriculture. So right now you don't have Somalian piracy. The reason why you don't have Somalian piracy is people recognized that this piracy is not because these people want to be pirates. This piracy is because the agricultural economy has collapsed. So they came up with a plan to store and harvest rainfall when it happens and set up a system of irrigation systems in the entire country. And these people, a lot of non-profits went around and convinced, and the primary funder for this was Norway. Norway has like US has got USAID, Norway has got NORAID. NORAID funded this creation of this irrigation system. And through that, they brought back agriculture. And suddenly, these farm boys could go back to their farms. So they decided, let's go back to farms. Why go on a ship and try to hijack? So all these things. So sustainable development cannot be just about the environment. You have to consider the equity implications. You have to consider the economic implications. So sustainable development really is a three-legged stool. And all three legs have to be equally important. Now, I'll generally give you the history of sustainable development, and in three phases. And this is both from a US and a European perspective. Okay? Both in US and Europe, the first attention to sustainability came from the environment. Prior to about the 1950s and 1960s, everyone in the world, even in US and Europe, generally took the environment for granted. People believed that Mother Nature has amazing capacity to fix all problems. If pollutants were created in the US, in UK, some polluting chemical was created, people used to say, the solution to pollution is dilution. That is, if you have lots of chemicals, rather than putting it in a small pond, put it out into the ocean. When you put it out into the ocean, then, because the ocean is much larger, it will take care of it. Okay? And so that used to be the thing. But in the mid-1950s, I forget the year, there was a book published in the US that made everyone in the US wake up to the limits of Mother Nature. And the name of the book, does anyone remember? Some of you environmentalists have to have read the book. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. So this lady was a biologist, but she was also a good writer. And so she went to different places and she started writing about why this place where lots of different wildlife, lots of different plants used to exist, why is this place now not so lively? And she would say, okay, this used to, all these birds used to be there, all these species used to be there, and then this factory came along, and because this factory came along and it was putting all these pollutants out there, these birds started dying, and one bird species started dying, another bird species started dying, and soon all the birds in that area were gone. And she documented that. She showed how this thing was changing. She measured over a period of time, 10, 12 years, in some community, she measured the amount of pollutants in the water and in the soil. And so she used her scientific training, but also her writing skills. And this book, although scientifically very powerful, would also appeal to a non-scientific audience. And people just read it and they were just shocked about how all these chemicals that factories were putting out that were fueling American prosperity at that time. US was really becoming very prosperous in the 50s and 60s, okay? And so it was fueling American prosperity, but it was also poisoning Americans. They became familiar with it. Then around that same time, in the 1960s, in Japan, there were a couple of major incidents. Remember, Japan was also industrializing after the Second World War, and they were concentrating on electronics. And one of the major chemicals used in electronics is, batteries, mercury, right? Yes. So that happened. And suddenly people started saying, well, you know what, the nature does not have infinite capacity. We got to start doing something about this. We cannot be polluting nature because nature has finite capacity too. We have believed that it has got infinite capacity, but the concentration volume is so much that nature has finite capacity. So even if not for nature's sake, but for our self-preservation, we have to pay attention to the environment. So there were three forces there. One is, the environmental aspect of sustainability took off first. The first motive was purely based on self-preservation. That we have to make sure that we don't pollute the environment so much, because if we do pollute the environment so much, then ultimately it's going to bite back. We are going to have negative consequences, like Rachel Carson showed, and then what happened in Japan, right? So, then the second school of thought was nature by itself is, a plant species or an animal species has as much right as one other species, the human species, to exist. So you have to, that we from a moral perspective should preserve all plant life and all animal life. Okay, so that was maybe the other end of the spectrum, right? One is self-preservation purely for our own sake. The other is recognizing that all these other species also have their right to existence, just as human beings have a right to existence, human race. So it's two opposites. And then out of that came this compromise that let's have sustainable development, which is between those two. So we need to be responsible, but we also should not do any development, right? Which is the other extreme. So the environmental aspect of sustainability really was developed quite a bit, and for a long time, most people, policymakers, researchers were focused on the environmental aspect of sustainability, and which is why in most places, whenever I ask people, or most people ask what is sustainable development, the definitions that are provided are all related to the environment. Okay, because and it's important. It's really important. The second aspect was how this concept of sustainable development started developed in the West, as it evolved in the West, was that equity social justice has to be paid attention to. Because if you don't pay attention to social justice, then many of the gains of all the sustainable development will be lost. Because there will come politicians who will respond to the social injustice, and their response would be to remove some of these responsible things that were there, good things that were done to preserve the environment. Okay, again, I'll give you an example from the US. And it's, you know, I study this thing primarily in the US context, and I have lots and lots of examples of how not to do it, okay? And so I'll share these examples. So one of the big US states is a state called Florida. And Florida has lots of environmental resources. It's a very pure, beautiful state. Florida's population increased from around 3 million in 1950 to 18 million in 1980. So in 30 years, its population went up by, multiplied by 6 times, okay? And it has started experiencing environmental problems. The state started experiencing environmental problems, particularly availability of drinking water. Okay, Florida is surrounded. Florida is a peninsula, is an isthmus, and it is surrounded by sea, ocean on all sides. Okay, and the geological formation of Florida, the state, is limestone. Limestone is very porous. Okay, so what is happening was, as lots of urban population is going, people were putting wells into the ground and extracting drinking water. So when you extract that drinking water and it is not replenished by rainfall at the same pace, there's vacuum created, right? And that vacuum is filled by seawater coming in. Because sea is there on all sides. And if you have a groundwater, freshwater source, and a little bit of seawater comes in, that becomes unfit for drinking because of salt content. And in response to that, the state of Florida created lots of mechanisms to control urban growth. Okay? And one negative aspect of lot of control on urban growth in terms of use of land, and this is a problem in Hong Kong, the only big problem in Hong Kong is that land becomes very expensive and the price of housing goes up. Okay? So the price of housing went up in Florida. So they enacted this new legislation in 1985 where all this urban development was strictly controlled to preserve the environment. The focus was on environmental preservation. To preserve the environment, they put in lots of places, and everyone called it sustainable development. Even though some researchers were saying this is not sustainable, this is only to preserve the environment that you're doing this, but it's creating a huge problem there of inequity. Only rich people can afford to live. Middle class people and poor people are having a huge problem. And even as the law was very successful, the policy was very successful in channeling urban development to certain areas, but it also increased housing prices. Now there's a way to offset that, okay? There are some ways to offset that, but Florida decided to ignore all those ways. They just said, we're just going to focus on improving the environment. And a few years later, along came a very powerful politician, and that politician happened to be a former builder. And this politician became the equivalent of chief minister of that state. In the US, it's called governor. This guy became the chief minister of that state. And he happened to be the younger brother of a US president. Okay, there was a US president. There were 2 US presidents called George Bush. The second one is the son of the first one, right? And his brother became the chief minister of the state. And he said, he in his election, he said, okay, this is injustice, and we must remove this law. And they removed the law. Okay, this is very good for the environment, but because they had not paid attention to social justice, a powerful politician came along, and they could undo the social justice, undo the entire legislation. Again, showing that sustainable development can never be about one of these things. It has to be about all these 3 things. Okay, so if there's any one point to be taken from this entire workshop, it is this: sustainable development is a 3-legged stool, and all 3 legs have to be given equal importance. Otherwise, it is not sustainable. It won't sustain for more than a short period of time. And third is that economic growth also has to happen. You really cannot have any environmental preservation without economic growth. Okay, and that's the debate that is happening between the global north and global south right now, right? The global north, which like US, UK, polluted the environment many, many years ago. Now they are generally rich. The global south is following in their footsteps, polluting the environment. And the global north is telling the global south not to pollute, right? The global south is in a tight spot because if it does not expand its economy, large sections of the population would be living under poverty. And that's a problem that the global south has to address today. Whereas climate change will happen, big things will happen, bad things will happen, they'll happen 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Politicians in the global south want to focus on today's problems rather than what might happen 20 years from now, right? So that produces a problem that even as we try to make things good for the environment, we have to do it in such a way that there is room for economic growth. So the global south has to find ways for economic growth, and the global north has to support it in making this transition to the to a more green economic system that would grow and grow in such a way that it has lesser impacts on the environment than a traditional conventional method of growing the economy, like the economic growth that US, UK experienced. That kind of economic growth, that trajectory, if attempted in India and Indonesia, it's going to have lots of negative effects on the environment. And the global north has to support the global south in doing that. Global south won't be able to do it on its own. Okay? So therefore, today we know for sure that unless we pay attention to all three legs of the stool, we won't have really sustainable development. Okay, now I'm going to take you to, this is connected to the internet, right? I want to show you a small talk. Is this connected to the internet? It's probably not.
It's connected.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. Okay, this is a short 10-minute talk.
Light one.
Climate change is already a heavy topic, and it's getting heavier because we understand.
This is fine, right? Volume is not too loud. Volume is okay, not too loud? I mean, fully screen. Yeah, so we can just play it like that. No, that's a different one. Let's go back. This is the.
कॉलेज में गया बात करते हैं आधे घंटे बाद
Maybe we'll get to the full slide. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, here it is. Let's play it at the full volume, okay? So this guy's a guy named Alex Stefan. He's a futurologist. He's an internal.
Climate Climate change is already a heavy topic, and it's getting heavier because we're understanding that we need to do more than we are, right? We're understanding, in fact, that those of us who live in the developed world need to be really pushing towards eliminating our emissions. That's, to put it mildly, not what's on the table now. And it tends to feel a little overwhelming when we look at what is there in reality today and the magnitude of the problem that we face. And when we have overwhelming problems in front of us, we tend to seek simple answers. And I think this is what we've done with climate change. We look at where the emissions are coming from. They're coming out of our tailpipes and smokestacks and so forth. And we say, okay, well, the problem is that they're coming out of fossil fuels that we're burning. So therefore, the answer must be to replace those fossil fuels with clean sources of energy. And while, of course, we do need clean energy, I would put to you that it's possible that by looking at climate change as a clean energy generation problem, we're in fact setting ourselves up not to solve it. And the reason why is that we live on a planet that is rapidly urbanizing. That shouldn't be news to any of us. However, it's hard sometimes to remember the extent of that urbanization. By mid-century, we're going to have about 8 billion, perhaps more, people living in cities or within a day's travel of one. We will be an overwhelmingly urban species. In order to provide the kind of energy that it would take for 8 billion people living in cities that are even somewhat like the cities that those of us in the global north live in today, we would have to generate an absolutely astonishing amount of energy. It may be possible that we are not even able to build that much clean energy, right? So if we're seriously talking about tackling climate change on an urbanizing planet, we need to look somewhere else for the solution. The solution, in fact, may be closer to hand than we think, because all of those cities we're building are opportunities. Every city determines, to a very large extent, the amount of energy used by its inhabitants. Right? We tend to think of energy use as a behavioral thing. I choose to turn this light switch on. But really, enormous amounts of our energy use are sort of predestined by the kinds of communities and cities that we live in. I won't show you very many graphs today, but if I can just focus on this one for a moment, it really tells us a lot of what we need to know, which is quite simply that if you look, for example, at transportation, a major category of climate emissions, there's a direct relationship between how dense a city is and the amount of climate emissions that its residents spew out into the air. And the correlation, of course, is that denser places tend to have lower emissions, which isn't really all that difficult to figure out if you think about it. Basically, we substitute in our lives access to the things we want. We go out there and we hop in our cars and we drive from place to place, and we're basically using mobility to get the access we need. But when we live in a denser community, suddenly what we find, of course, is that the things we need are close by. And since the most sustainable trip is the one that you never had to make in the first place, right, suddenly our lives become instantly more sustainable. And it is possible, of course, to increase the density of the communities around us. Some places are doing this with new eco-districts, developing whole new sustainable neighborhoods, which is nice work if you can get it. But most of the time, what we're talking about is, in fact, reweaving the urban fabric that we already have. So we're talking about things like infill development, really sharp little changes to where we have buildings, where we're developing, urban retrofitting, creating different sorts of spaces and uses out of places that are already there. Increasingly, we're realizing that we don't even need to densify an entire city. What we need instead is an average density that rises to a level where we don't drive as much and so on. And that can be done by raising the density in very specific spots a whole lot. Right? So you can think of it as tent poles that actually raise the density of the entire city. And we find that when we do that, we can in fact have a few places that are really hyperdense within a wider fabric of places that are perhaps a little more comfortable and achieve the same results. Now, we may find that there are places that are really, really dense and still hold on to their cars, but the reality is that by and large, what we see when we get a lot of people together with the right conditions is a threshold effect, where people simply stop driving as much, and increasingly more and more people, if they're surrounded by places that make them feel at home, give up their cars altogether. And this is a huge, huge energy savings, because what comes out of our tailpipe is really just the beginning of the story with climate emissions from cars. We have the manufacture of the car, the disposal of the car, all of the parking and freeways and so on. When you can get rid of all of those because somebody doesn't use any of them really, you find that you can actually cut transportation emissions as much as 90%. And people are embracing this. All around the world, we're seeing more and more people embrace this sort of walk shed life. People are saying that it's moving from the idea of the dream home to the dream neighborhood. And when you layer that over with the kind of ubiquitous communications that we're starting to see, what you find is in fact even more access sort of suffused into spaces. Some of it's transportation access. This is a magnificent map that shows me, in this case, how far I can get from my home in 30 minutes using public transportation. Some of it is about walking. It's not all perfect yet. This is Google Walking Maps. I asked how to do the Greater Ridgeway, and it told me to go via Guernsey. It didn't tell me that this route may be missing sidewalks or pedestrian paths. But the technologies are getting better, and we're starting to really kind of crowdsource this navigation. And as we just heard earlier, of course, we're also learning how to put information on dumb objects, things that don't have any wiring in them at all. We're learning how to include in these sort of systems of notation and navigation. Part of what we're finding with this is that what we thought was the major point of manufacturing and consumption, which is to get a bunch of stuff, is not in fact how we really live best in dense environments. What we're finding is that what we want is access to the capacities of things. My favorite example is a drill. Who here owns a drill, a home power drill? Okay, I do too. The average home power drill is used somewhere between 6 and 20 minutes in its entire lifetime, depending on who you ask. And so what we do is we buy these drills that have a potential capacity of thousands of hours of drill time, use them once or twice to put a hole in the wall and let them sit, right? Our cities, I would put to you, are stockpiles of these surplus capacities. And while we could try and figure out new ways to use those capacities, such as cooking or making ice sculptures or even a mafia hit, what we probably will find is that in fact, turning those products into services that we have access to when we want them is a far smarter way to go. And in fact, even space itself is turning into a service. We're finding that people can share the same spaces, do stuff with vacant space. Buildings are becoming bundles of services, right? So we have new designs that are helping us take mechanical things that we used to spend energy on, like heating, cooling, etc., and turn them into things that we avoid spending energy on. So we light our buildings with daylight. We cool them with breezes. We heat them with sunshine. In fact, when we use all these things, what we found is that in some cases, energy use in a building can drop as much as 90%, which brings on another threshold effect I like to call furnace dumping, which is quite simply, if you have a building that doesn't need to be heated with a furnace, you save a whole bunch of money up front. These things actually become cheaper to build than the alternatives. Now, when we look at being able to slash our product use, slash our transportation use, slash our building energy use, all of that is great, but it still leaves something behind. And if we're going to really truly become sustainable cities, we need to think a little differently. This is one way to do it. This is Vancouver's propaganda about how green a city they are. And certainly lots of people have taken to heart this idea that a sustainable city is covered in greenery. So we have visions like this, we have visions like this, we have visions like this. Now all of these are fine projects, but they really have kind of missed an essential point, which is it's not about the leaves above, it's about the systems below. Do they, for instance, capture rainwater so that we can reduce water use? Water is energy intensive. Do they perhaps include green infrastructure so that we can take runoff and water that's going out of our houses and clean it and filter it and grow urban street trees? Do they connect us back to the ecosystems around us by, for example, connecting us to rivers and allowing for restoration? Do they allow for pollination, pollinator pathways that bees and butterflies and such can come back into our cities? Do they even take the very waste matter that we have from food and fiber and so forth and turn it back into soil, right? And sequester carbon, take carbon out of the air in the process of using our cities? I would submit to you that all of these things are not only possible, they're being done right now. And that it's a darn good thing. Because right now, our economy, by and large, operates, as Paul Hawkins said, by stealing the future, selling it in the present, and calling it GDP. And if we have another 8 billion, or 7 billion, or 6 billion even people living on a planet where their cities also steal the future, we're going to run out of future really fast. But if we think differently, I think that in fact we can have cities that are not only zero emissions, but have unlimited possibilities as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, now this provides a Western perspective where, you know, for a long time, people have been talking about how the model of development in the US and many developed countries is not sustainable. And so some of the things that they were saying here that, well, they're trying to make cities more dense. India already has a density. But what is India trying to do? Make it less dense. In many developed countries, people are giving up cars. In Netherlands and in Denmark, in many housing colonies, people are saying there is this road coming through my colony. I don't want the road because I want to go everywhere by bicycle. So please, they're coming to the city and saying remove the road and make it a green space. So we can enjoy the green space and not have cars going through our place. Okay, and instead what are people in Netherlands doing? They're biking, using the bicycle and going to places. And we are trying, in India we're trying to get away from the bicycle, right? So definitely Western perspective, but there are two things I want you to take away from this. First, we often think about sustainable development as a consumer choice, as he said. We often think about sustainability and environmental preservation as switching off the light when we leave the room, or not, leaving the tap on for too long, taking shorter showers and all that. That is good, we should do that. But what if I am turning on the lights off in my house when I leave the house, but then I'm getting into a car and driving for 30 kilometers to office? It's better that I leave the lights on and then take a bus to office, okay? Or a train to office. So often the bigger unsustainable things are determined not by my behavior, it's determined by the structure of the city. And by changing the structure, and the other thing is, by changing the structure of the city, you reduce the carbon footprint of everyone living in the city. Whereas if you tell people you have to reduce their carbon footprint, it's based on people's responsiveness to that choice, right? If you tell people, okay, switch off the lights, some people will do it, some will not do it. But if you make the city fully, public transit, metro, then everyone will take the metro. You don't have to depend on people's consciousness, their conscience and how they respond to that, right? Everyone, even people without the knowledge of environmental sustainability will take the metro, right? So therefore, we need to focus on these bigger structural things for how a city is developed, rather than telling people switch off the lights. We should tell people that's a good thing too. But the bigger one is what we can do as planners. That's where planners and architects have a big role. Planners can determine the structure of a city and thereby ensure that the carbon footprint of everyone in the city is very, very low. Okay, the other thing is that I want to share here is, see, all the developed countries built out roads and now they're trying to come back to an existence without much roads. Okay? So in other words, they went through a phase where they didn't have much roads. They built lots and lots of roads and now they're questioning whether they need so many roads, and they're trying to build another future, another kind of urban form. Maybe bicycle oriented, or maybe in the case of Hong Kong, train oriented. Okay? Developing countries do not have to make the mistakes of developed countries as they urbanize. Okay, and in other words, developing countries have this opportunity to jump over, it's called leapfrog over, a bad phase in urbanization. There is nothing that says developing countries have to follow the same bad path. Okay? And I'll give you an example. How many of you, many of you, at least some of you are older than 25? Okay? In the year 2000, how many people in India had a phone at home? 10%? Maybe 15%? Okay, and the challenge of getting a phone to everyone's house was a huge challenge, right? And government and state did not have the resources to prioritize phone access. When people are dying from, waterborne diseases, people don't have water. Phone seems a luxury when you don't have clean water. So the government of India does not have resources to lay out the phone lines. State governments do not have the resources. Then along came cell phones. Now, most people in India, even in the remotest village, have a cell phone. But today, if the government of India were to say, yes, you have a cell phone, but I'm going to put these landline also, what would you say to that? It's a pretty stupid idea, right? So knowing that a car-dependent system is bad, India and other developing countries should not be building a car-dependent system. It's like making landlines after everyone knows that there are cell phones. Okay? So it's a very, that shift has to come. Like people like you and I, planners have to think about it, talk about it, and tell politicians about it. And like generally people need to have this consciousness that now that we have cell phones, we do not have to build landlines. Why was there need to build landlines? Why do people still want to build landlines? Or people might say, hey, in the West, they built landlines and everyone had access to a land phone, then they got cell phones, so we must do the same. Doesn't make sense, right? Because we were, people in India can say, we should tell the people, decision makers in India, that just because the West built out a bad system, car-dependent system, and now they are finding that a car-dependent system is not good, we have this opportunity to skip that bad phase and go directly to a future. And it's much easier in India because the density is there, many places are walkable. If we can change politicians and development officials' mindset to where a walkable system, a non-car dependent system is okay, we can skip or leapfrog over 50 years of bad development in Western countries. Okay, and that change has to happen, like right now, because all these urban areas in India and in Indonesia and Nigeria will get built out over the next 20-25 years. So one can't wait for 10 or 15 years to make that change. It has to be done right now. Like it had to be done like 10 years ago, but right now is good. Okay? Okay, any other thoughts about what you saw? Any thoughts or any comments on what you saw? So this guy is, his name is Alex Stefan. He's a British futurologist. They study about how things should be in the future, and they talk about how these things can change in the future. So anyway.
So to make this possible, more number of architects and planners should be sitting on the decision-making side. Otherwise, it's very difficult for bureaucrats to make that understand and have that sensitivity towards more bicycle-oriented or walkable neighborhood concept.
But my question is, are architects and planners oriented towards that? Yes, there should be more of them in the bureaucracy. But are architects and planners also thinking about walkable communities? I don't know. I think that's not happening too. Yeah.
Some of the cities, there are people who are making the changes.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Pune has come up with a city bicycle plan,
Yeah.
which is led by very senior most urban designers. And it is happening at a really good pace. But I don't know very much about the other cities as well. But somewhere these micro-level changes are happening.
Okay, and I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something about the big changes that are happening in India on sustainability. They're coming from the bureaucrats. They're not coming from architects and planners, and that's the sad thing. We architects and planners should be more concerned. So this thing about indoor had nothing to do with architects and planners. Ambikapur had nothing to do with architects and planners. In indoor, it was a bureaucrat. I'm forgetting his name now. The bureaucrat said this system, IAS officer, he said this system is crazy, we are putting this landfill. And this landfill is right next to the river that runs through Indore. So imagine all the pollution that is leaching out from the landfill. You know, there's this liquid that is produced. When you put a lot of things on a dam, liquid is produced, and the liquid is toxic and is going into the river. And he said this is not a good system. Let's find a way out. And Indore has lots of very good architects and planners. And no one was talking about this. But this bureaucrat said, hey, this is a bad system, let's figure out a way. And he got KPMG. And KPMG got some civil engineers actually, who came up with the system. Architects and planners are not involved in any part of the scheme, Similarly, in Ambikapur, 200,000, they didn't even get consultants there. It was just the district collector deciding, okay, what can we do, and started talking to people. So I think we architects and planners should be more responsive. So we can give some ideas to administrators. But administrators are generating so much of stuff on their own also. We need to popularize this and make sure that we walk away from the conventional models. That we should have more roads, and cities have become. Roads are needed in developing countries. Okay, there are many rural areas that don't have a road access. So if someone is sick, it becomes a challenge. Children going to school becomes a challenge. So some amount of road building is necessary. But to think of an urban future based on car dependency is probably like making landlines today when everyone has cell phones. Okay, so think about it. And there are 2 readings for tomorrow. The one on tragedy of commons. There's a lot of discussion about how to control population. That's secondary to the points that we want to discuss. Okay, so look beyond the control of population. Look at what he suggests would be methods of and how feasible they are. And then, if possible, read the other article by Scott Campbell, Green Cities, Growing Cities, Just Cities. Okay, those are 2 difficult articles. So we are letting you off a bit early today, so you have some more time to read those articles. Okay. So see you tomorrow. What time? 10:30?
10:25.
10:25. Okay. Thank you very much.
And I also shared the tomorrow's that one reading for.
You've shared, right? And the Scott Campbell reading has already come to you.
Yeah. Take all readings there, guys.
Thank you, sir. We anticipate the upcoming sessions to be as enlightening and engaging as today's. As we gather insights from this esteemed figure, recognized as a beacon of excellence in his respective field, we look forward to beginning the day with the same enthusiasm displayed today and aspire to absorb valuable insights that will contribute to our collective knowledge. The success of this course lies in the active participation and contributions of each attendee. We express our sincere gratitude once again and look forward to reconvening tomorrow. Let us engage, learn, and collaborate to make our cities more sustainable. Thank you.